Um, I'm sorry, I got a cold, but I hope you can hear what I'm saying nonetheless. My voice is a bit low. Well, I wish first really heartily to thank the organizers of this workshop for the invitation, because it was both a surprise and a pleasure and an honor for me to be here. I wouldn't have the slightest idea when almost 40 years now I was studying these things that I would be here in Innsbruck 100 years after the 22 conference to tell you what I've learned about that. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here. So, okay, let's go back 100 years. I started with giving you a very short sketch of what was going on in the field of applied mechanics at the time, and running the risk of being too schematic. I would say that the main thing that was felt throughout the scientific community was that the time was over when things related to the properties of real objects of interest to engineers were studied by mathematical physicists with the technical means of the classic standard mathematical analysis, which had given birth to the beautiful, rigorous, and totally useless results of the standard rational mechanics, which was involved with ideal fluids, rigid bodies. People had started to produce physical insight and mathematical representation to understand the properties of real bodies, which are neither rigid nor ideal, and are the things that practical engineers wanted to deal with in order to improve technology and so on. Just to give an example of how this coming together of fundamental research, say, and applied and technical application worked, one of the best examples I can think of, especially with connection to this meeting, was, for example, the development by Ludwig Prandtl of the boundary layer theory and all the results that came after that. And the final result of all this movement, scientific movement, was that there was a wide feeling that some kind of new organization was needed in order to put the different figure of scientists involved with these problems together to discuss things and break the boundaries between the established disciplines, mathematicians, physicists, engineers. Applied mechanics was going to build itself as in a sense, a new discipline which involved all these sort of figures in a new development. And this was a feeling that was widely perceived everywhere. How does this thing go? Okay. Just to give you one example among many possible others, at the Naturforscherversammlung of the German scientists in Bad Nauheim in 1920, people working in applied mechanics, like this is a quote, you can see everything, it's not adjusted to the screen. Anyway, that's from a letter from Ludwig Prandtl to Theodor von Karman and Erich Trefts, saying that in Bad Nauheim, we had the idea that it would be a good thing to have for the next Versammlung a separate session for applied mechanics so that we can have mathematicians, physicists, and engineers come together and discuss things. And this is what happened, in fact, the following year at the Versammlung in Jena. That same year, 1921, to give you a clear example of how things were changing, a new society devoted to applied mechanics was born, the Gesellschaft für angewandte Mathematik und Mechanik, and the new journal, directed by Richard von Mises, the Zeitschrift für angewandte Mathematik und Mechanik, which in the turn of few years became, if not the most important one, possibly the most important forum for publication in the field. Okay, these are the two persons, the two inventors of Innsbruck 22, Theodor von Karman, who was the director of the Aerodynamical Institute at the University of Aachen, and Tullio Levi-Civita, a mathematician from the University of Rome. Actually, the idea was originated by von Karman. He shared obviously this idea that he had a nice way to condense in 5 words this scientific program, turning engineering design into engineering science. And that called for a new kind of interaction between people from the more fundamental side of the things with people more interested in technical applications. Moreover, Karman wanted to do that on a wider circle. He was dreaming of an international forum for all that. And the idea of Innsbruck came exactly from his willingness to act in this direction. And he chose Tullio Levi-Civita, whom he had known before at different congresses for different reasons, as a partner for this enterprise. That's the letter. Just one thing, I have reproduced the documents in their original language and in full extension. I will not have the time either to translate or to read all these letters and documents entirely. I will use them just as a memorandum for what I have to say, but obviously the slides will be available to anyone interested in having a closer look at these things. It's April, again, you can see the first line up there. It's April 1922. And Karman writes to Levi-Civita saying exactly what I was saying before. There is the need for to put together people coming from different disciplines. It is important to have as international as possible such a meeting. And so he was asking Levi-Civita to join in the enterprise, taking care of the Italian side and more generally of the side of the scientists on the other side of the barricade with respect to the war that had just closed a few years before. He also suggested Innsbruck. At that time, it was still just a suggestion. Maybe Innsbruck would be a nice place to keep the conference for various reasons. And it is interesting, and it gives you an idea of the kind of situation we were moving in. Bozen, says Karman, would be probably even better, but it's in Italy now and therefore it is too expensive. And this matter of costs was a dramatic issue at the time, especially for German scientists. Erich Trefz, who actually came to Innsbruck, could come to Innsbruck only because von Karman gave him the money to come, because he said, my finances are completely broken. And that was so Innsbruck was chosen because it was well located and affordable. And Levi-Civita's answer was enthusiastic. He responded very warmly and said, okay, fine, it seems to be a great idea. And he says in his reply, it will be a good idea to send the invitation to the conference also to some French and British scientists. If any of them will come, so much better, but at least we will show that we are moved by a genuine international scientific spirit. Now, this issue of scientific internationalism was a very hot issue at the time. There's no time now to tell you the whole story, but just to remind, at the end of World War I, the whole pattern of international relations in science was reorganized. The International Research Council was established, which supervised the activities of the different unions of the different disciplines, like the International Union for Mathematics, etc. And in all the statutes of the IRC and of the unions adhering to IRC, in the statutes it was written that scientists from the former Allied Central Powers, Germans, Austrians and Allies, were excluded from participation. The boycott of German science was the key figure in the international official science policy after World War I, and this lasted for a long time, almost 10 years after the war. Only about 26, 27, things started to change. So, calling for an international conference aiming at having together scientists coming from all over Europe was really a gamble. And so much more because this thing was not only typical of the official international organizations, such as the international unions, but also of different scientific meetings that had been going on before the war and kept going on after that. I just show you an impressive list. No one ever talks about that. We all know everything about the first and the second and the fifth Solvay conferences in physics because they were important for the development of discipline and so on and so forth. No one ever speaks about the third and the fourth Solvay conferences. They weren't so groundbreaking, but what is interesting is that if you look at the names of the participants, you will find an interesting feature that two international conferences, prestigious as the Solvay conference were, devoted to properties of matter, atoms and electrons, magnetism, therefore, and you won't find just one name of German or Austrian scientists, which were at the time the leading exponents in the field. So the boycott was, but obviously because Solvay was in Belgium, and Belgium was bitterly feeling still the consequences of what was going on during the war. So, and both Karman and Levi-Civita knew very well that they would have to face such kind of difficulties. They had to confront the deep interest of scientists in joining the venture because the field was ripe for new things to come, and therefore there was a scientific serious interest in the thing. And it was, they had already, however, to fight the resistances that were to be expected on the basis of, let's call it in a wide sense, political grounds. From this point of view, they judged, especially von Karman, was very sensible to the fact that it was important to have some outstanding scientists coming from the former neutral countries to join the adventure in order to give more credibility, so to speak. And so he tried to take in Henry Lawrence, probably definitely one of the most well-known, respected, authoritative scientists in Europe. And he wrote a letter to Lawrence asking him to be together with him and Levi-Civita, to put his signature on the invitation for the conference. But in fact, at the end, Lawrence refused, not because he was not sympathetic with the idea, but because he could not go to Innsbruck at the time, and he'd say that it makes no sense that I give my signature to an invitation to a conference where I will not go. But he was very instrumental in raising the interest of Dutch scientists, which actually came to Innsbruck. And so that's another interesting thing. That's the Italian version. I could never find the original version of the invitation letter, what we could call today the call for papers for the Innsbruck conference, which obviously was written by von Karman in German. This is the Italian translation made by Levi-Civita, and it is stressed twice that the conference will be senza vincoli ufficiali, which I have translated in my title, without official connection. We have nothing to do with the official institution. This is a private initiative. Scientists will come just by the basis of their individual commitment. They are not to be representatives of the institutions of their homeland, no official character anyway. And this was obviously, in the end, a kind of refusal of politics, which turned out to be an excellent political move, because it succeeded, in fact, slowly, but succeeded. So, answers and reactions. As was to be expected, all sorts of reactions came out. Most people, both in Germany and in Italy, were responsive, but they had to face the difficulties they expected. This is a list of the different range of reactions that Levi-Civita got from his French colleagues. Some of them were obviously interested, but did not go because they were responsible of directors of laboratories connected to the military, and therefore it was not a wise idea for them to ask permission to go to such a conference because of various diplomatic, political limitations. Some of them, like the first answer mentioned up there, Marcel Brillouin, was sternly refusing to shake hands with German scientists until they understand that they have to pay for the damage they have created during the war. It is just one example of the harsh resentment that was felt, especially in France and Belgium, against the Germans and the German scientists. And that all the story of the famous document of the 93 intellectuals supporting the German invasion of Belgium and so on and so forth. It's interesting to translate. This is what Brillouin says, my appreciation for their moral character is insufficient to allow me to shake hands with them, whatever their incontestable scientific value. It's just a very firm opposition. Levi-Civita tried in Italy to get the support of Vito Volterra. Vito Volterra was Mr. Italian Science at the time, the best known Italian mathematician and the best known Italian scientist active in the reorganization of the scientific international milieu. But and since Levi-Civita knew very well that Volterra was on the side of the IRC and would have looked with suspicion at such an idea, he tried to trap him into a false history. He wrote to Volterra that the idea of the conference has been raised up by OZN in Uppsala, so a scientist from a neutral country, and so why not? Volterra didn't fall into the trap and sternly refused to go, he wouldn't go, and refused to give his adhesion to the conference. It was again a political move from his part. More or less the same things happened to von Karman on the other side. He had excellent reactions, like the one from Sommerfeld. Sommerfeld couldn't go, but as he said, I will send Heisenberg. In a different letter, which I couldn't retrieve, he says, I will send meinen genialen Studenten Heisenberg. Heisenberg was at the time in the middle of atomic things and early quantum mechanical ideas. He was working on the turbulence problem exactly for his doctoral dissertation, which he then discussed the following year with Sommerfeld. And Sommerfeld sent, in fact, Heisenberg to Innsbruck to talk about the early results of his research. But not all reactions were so sympathetic, like for Mises, who was a close friend of Karman, by the way, but he said rather sharply, I will not come, and you will not be surprised since you know what I think about the Italians and about the Tyrol question. And moreover, it seems to me quite bizarre that German professors are willing to share with strangers their aerodynamical theoretical researches while we at home are prevented from building real airplanes. Again, a reference to the difficult conditions imposed by the peace treaties and so on and so forth. Still, the thing after all worked. This is the full list of the people who came to Innsbruck in September 1922. Oh, and I have missed something in the earlier, but it's quite interesting. That's amazing. The call for papers, let's say, the invitation letter was ready by July 12, 1922. Therefore, it was circulated all over Europe in the second half of July for a conference to be held at the beginning of September. Hundreds, literally hundreds of letters, and obviously there was no internet, no phone calls, no nothing. Everything went by surface mail. It was possible to organize the conference in less than 2 months. That's quite an amazing feat indeed. 33 people came to Innsbruck. You have the names. I'm not sure that all the names are correct because I got this list from a handwritten document in von Karman's papers and with the signatures of all the participants. And some of them are just impossible to decipher. They were probably, so there are a few question marks there because I'm not sure who these people actually were. But most of them are clearly identifiable. And if you look at the list of names, it's a wonderful mixture of what they intended to do. Theoretical physicists, pure mathematicians, applied engineers, industrialists, all sorts of things. Just a few names, a few figures of the people who attended. You have the whole spectrum, say from theoretical physicist and philosopher Philipp Frank to, at the other end of the spectrum, industrialist and aeronautical engineer Hugo Junkers, who was the first to build full metal airplanes. And by the way, he was one of the most important contributors financially to von Karman's Institute in Aachen. Karman acted as a consultant for Junkers. You have Wilhelm Hose, probably the most important Swedish physicist, a key figure in the Nobel Committee for Physics at the time. Wilhelm Dierknes, the father of dynamic meteorology. And coming to just the subject, our main subject, turbulence, the three people that together, obviously, with von Karman, gave at Innsbruck lectures and conferences specifically devoted to the turbulence problem. Ludwig Prandtl, the main figure probably in the field at the time. Jan Burgers, a young student of RFS who was starting, he had just abandoned physics and the early quantum mechanics and shifted to high fluid dynamics basically and started to work on turbulence and, as we say, Werner Heisenberg. These are the first pages of the proceedings, and one can get an idea of the kind of topics that were discussed. So, I think that I'm not 100% sure of what I'm saying now, but I think that really the Innsbruck conference in September 22 was the first international conference, scientific conference, held after the war, where scientists from both the sides that had fought each other during the war were present. There were Italians and there were Germans and Austrians, plus scientists from the neutral countries. And were it only for that reason, Innsbruck deserves to be recorded as a fundamental step in the recreation of an international connection of scientists in the interwar period. Plus the strictly scientific interests of the things that were discussed at the meeting, but I will not enter this matter, and this will be discussed in the next presentation, the contribution to turbulence in particular that were presented at the meeting. And even more important, I think, was the outcome of Innsbruck, what came after that. It was a partial, encouraging success, and immediately the idea was taken over by von Karman and others to try to repeat the thing, widening the scientific spectrum of topics to be covered, not just fluid dynamics, or to tell it as they used at the time, hydro and aeromechanic, but that means fluid dynamics, but to the whole field of applied mechanics. The thing was discussed with some of the participants at Innsbruck, namely Jan Burgers. The idea was to repeat the attempt to put people together on a wider circle. It was suggested to hold the next meeting in Delft, which was in a neutral country and therefore offered all as again a private initiative with no official connection. This lasted throughout the interwar period, and the thing worked. in April 1924, the Delft conference was held. Quite interesting, this is something I have forgotten to say at the beginning, so let me go back for a while. Why did von Karman choose Levi Civita as a partner for Innsbruck? There were several reasons for that. One was obviously the outstanding scientific status of Levi Civita. He was one of the best known mathematical physicists in the world, in fact. But beside that, he was Italian, therefore from a country that had been on the opposite side of the war. And Karman, who knew Levi Civita, knew that he could count on Levi Civita's genuinely internationalist attitude towards scientific matters. Levi Civita was one of the few Italian scientists who were opposed to the entrance of war of Italy against Austria and Germany, and he was sternly opposing the boycott policy adopted by the official institutions. So this was an asset for the international outcome of the event. And third, Levi Civita was absolutely not a technical person. Von Karman insisted, and all the founding fathers after that, on the fact that this new body, this new forum for scientific exchange that was going to be built had absolutely to put together people from the more fundamental sciences with people interested in technical and applied matters. And in fact, when Levi Civita told him, I will come to Innsbruck, but I will not give a paper because I am not at all competent in technical things, in aeronautics or so on, Karman insisted that he nonetheless gave a paper on his researches of purely mathematical interest in wave mechanics and something. And this is a thing that goes on and on and on throughout the history of the further congresses. The Delft Congress was organized in 3 sessions. One was elasticity theory, the second was fluid dynamics, and the third session, rational mechanics, meaning more fundamental mathematical treatments of this subject. These are just documents saying how it was decided after the success of Delft to transform this still non-official organization into a permanent one. The idea of the congresses was built every 4 years with their schedules. And this is just a list of numbers to give you an idea of what went on. From the small Innsbruck conference with 33 participants, less than 10 years later in Stockholm, about 600 scientists, and now from all over the world came. Because it's not only the quantity which is important, but most important is if you look at the composition of the, again, informal international committee which was established and which adopted scientists by cooptation, again, in a very private way. By 1926, this again, the upper line is missing. This is the composition of the International Committee which was established in Delft. And as you see, we already have the United States and the British there. So the enlargement of the crisis was taking place. French and Belgians were still missing, but they joined 2 years later. Sorry, that was 24, and this is 26. In 26, you have a real international committee as representative as possible. You have all the nations. This is 24, 26, when still at the official level, the boycott policy was going on. So it was a real incredible success, which was not to be given for granted at the beginning. And it worked. And in 1930, you had already expanded outside the border of Europe, and you have Japanese and American scientists joining the committee. And the last note, what happened even later, after World War II, things were reorganized again. At that time, this informal body, which was the International Congresses of Applied Mechanics, turned into an official organization, an official union. The International Union of Theoretical and Applied Mechanics was founded at the 6th conference in Paris in 1946, and they joined the International Council of Scientific Unions. But what is interesting, I think, are a couple of things. One is that the sequence number of the conferences was maintained. Once the International Union was established, they didn't start renumbering the congresses. They kept the numbers starting from 0, Innsbruck, and then 1, 2, 3, and throughout. So there was a continuity in that. But the continuity was apparent in a very symbolic way, I would say, in the name they chose for the union. The congresses were International Congresses of Applied Mechanics, so you could think of establishing an international union for applied mechanics. The fact that the theoretical was added to the name, and the final name was, as it is now, the International Union of Theoretical and Applied Mechanics, was, I think, a clear indication by the founding fathers that still were there. The UTAM was founded by, among others, von Karman, Jan Burgers, von Mises, they were all there. That mark of theoretical was a clear sign of the blend of theoretical approaches and technical applications that had been the dream and the objective and the scientific meaning of the thing of those who had about 25 years earlier convened in Innsbruck, and that spirit was still there. Well.